Hi.
Hello. So I'm Alex,
And I'm Megan.
and this is the Dames Macabre podcast.
Woo! Megan speaking. I think they'll be able to tell our voices apart, but
The accents are pretty much a giveaway, surely.
and here we are, finally making this project live. So Dames Macabre is our spooky little foundling baby that we're trying to develop. And so before we get going, we should introduce ourselves so that it makes sense for why we're here in people's ear space. So, hi, I'm Megan, or Dr. Meaghan Allen, newly minted. I am a PhD in English literature and American Studies from the University of Manchester, and I recently completed my PhD thesis on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and medieval conceptions of blood. So, all things spooky, vampiric, about the body, circulation, blood, medieval cosmology, astrology, hellmouths, souls, bodies, etc. We'll get into that more, but I am from Pasadena, California. So that's the accent solved for everyone. And I will just hand it over to my wonderful co host.
Hi. So I am Dr. Alex Carabine. I got my PhD from the University of Liverpool last summer now, I guess. Wow. And I researched the influences of medieval culture on Gothic literature. So I did for my thesis from 1764 to about 1900. So I've got heavy emphasis on the Victorian era and Victorian Gothic. But because I'm a massive Gothic nerd, that also just splays into the 20th and 21st century. So I look at a direct inheritance from the medieval era into Gothic literature itself. So I remember that I was reading Dracula on my MA, and there's this wonderful moment where Van Helsing says they will be as knights of the cross going forth and whatnot. And I just had this sudden epiphany that Stoker has read medieval stuff. And so I decided that I wanted my thesis to kind of prove that these Gothic authors were reading medieval texts and then inserting medieval themes like blood, like humors, just the general horrors, the idea of this expansive, terrifying universe, that these things were occurring within Gothic literature. And so instead of it just being, I think this is something that we'll probably discuss as we go on, that instead
Absolutely.
of it just being like a vibe or an aesthetic, that there's like a ruined abbey somewhere and that's as medieval as it gets. Between us, I think we kind of prove how intrinsic the medieval era is to like Gothic and horror. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that soon.
Yes, me too. So, yeah, our research interests definitely align. So, as Alex said, she looks at the direct inheritance, what texts these Gothic authors read, whereas I do what I consider the crypto medieval, which means that I am looking at the unintentional uses of the medieval in specifically Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but that is a kind of meta case study for Gothic or horror as a whole. So, for example, when I say the unintentional inheritance, it can also definitely be very intentional, and that's called medievalism. So, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, in Buffy, if you're familiar, the Knights of Byzantium, or anytime you have like a monk that's in a habit and it's,
Even the literal Hellmouth, like right
yes.
there, you've got the entire iconography just lifted straight from the medieval. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So, but another kind of to make more sense of what my research is, because it is a bit more ephemeral or ethereal, it's intangible, whereas yours is much more direct, or you can trace it much more concretely than mine, where it's kind of like picking things out of the air, but then they're actually substantial. Is so the reason why horror, especially religious horror, so The Exorcist, we're recently going through a very large nunsploitation renaissance, The First Omen, Immaculate, is the reason that those horror films make sense or have horror is because of the religious aspects. So the Christian, especially the Catholic, and all of that is derivative of not only what occurred in the Reformation, right? So late 1500s or through the 1600s. So Martin Luther, in his 99 Theses, but even before that, when the idea of the holy blood of Christ really being part of the Catholic Church ritual, those ideas were established in the Middle Ages and have just been so ingrained in Western culture and Christianized culture that they are, even if we're in like a secularized society now or leaning secular, potentially post secular, they still make sense regardless to if you grew up atheistic or agnostic or whatnot, because it's just
Well,
part of the language, the cultural lexicon.
it's like a conduit from like the Middle Ages, either whether you stay Catholic, heavy Catholic, or it all gets kind of a little bit more fragmented during the Reformation. The core issues are still there predominantly. And then
Mhm.
it just kind of acts as this, as I say, conduit from the Middle Ages to now that just kind of carries so much visual information and atmosphere and whatnot that people can kind of pick up on. And it's, of course, worth noting that the reason why writers, authors, filmmakers go back to Catholicism as the scariest form of Christianity is because it is medieval. There's this whole PR campaign that happens in the Renaissance where they decide to try and make the Middle Ages as disgusting and awful and ridiculous as possible so that they can link themselves to the classical era and therefore be better. So having the Middle Ages be the Dark Ages is totally deliberate. And so it is the scariest form. And that's why it does pop up so relentlessly in horror. And we're having this wonderful horror renaissance now of all this imagery.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just even the Dark Ages, which we know is a false title, and we'll get into that, but also just the name Middle Ages or medieval, because it's this middle period that is sandwiched between classics or antiquity, that great time of
Oh,
Rome,
oh.
philosophy, and then just 1,000 years of no one cares.
And sepia and grayscale, nothing.
Yeah, and dirty and filthy and just so superstitious.
Like cruel.
Yeah, and then but now we're in the Renaissance. We're being reborn, and then the Reformations, because the church is just it's too powerful and superstitious and controlling. We're now
Yep.
entering into the era of modernity or the early modern, and then of course, 100 or so years later, we start having the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment awakening.
Right in the phrases right there, you've got the dark age where the icky, scary stuff is, and then you have the Enlightenment where everyone's very clever and sensible and wonderful and patting each other on the back.
Yes, and literally like light, enlightenment. We're illuminating the realities. So this is Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon and Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Just kind of, we're here to destigmatize, almost in a sense, the Middle Ages and make the medieval and the Middle Ages modern and fun, but at the same time doing, a backwards track and making the modern medieval because the Middle Ages, if you haven't picked up, is still very much a part of how we articulate and express and engage in the world, especially ideas and concepts around the body and blood and personhood. I mean, we just got a new pope, right? Last week. But I mean, that's millions of people whose lives are going to be affected by this one person. Popes are created in the Middle Ages. I mean, this is like a living relic in a sense.
And it happens in so many different ways as well. I mean, I remember I was watching a film and I can't remember what it was now. I'll see if it comes back to me later. But I got really annoyed because they were talking about women and women's bodies and they were talking about science. And I started popping off because they were referring to Galen's science and they were talking about it as if that's current. And I was like, no, 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 we're not having this. We're not letting this stand. So we'll be looking at stuff like that. But even right now, you and I, or both of us, this is more for our watchers perhaps than our listeners, but we're wearing medieval technology right now. We are both wearing glasses, dear listeners, and glasses were invented in the Middle Ages. And I just have to point out these moments where there's this assumption that science just didn't exist in the Middle Ages, that the medieval era had nothing going for it except, well, not even potatoes and tomatoes, unlike the Hollywood films like to say, because they hadn't been imported yet. So turnips, I guess.
Discovery of the New World.
So yes, so there was progress and development. The Renaissance could not have happened without the Middle Ages, and its effects are continuing even now, even in the way we talk about the world and how we talk about horror in the world. We'll so often say, oh, that's a dark age torture that they're doing to that person. And
Yeah.
it's not usually, actually, usually is the Renaissance. So you'll hear us get quite bitchy about this, or I will. I will start getting really angry.
I get feisty and overexcited and yes, and two things off that. So one, just to go to the science thing, because with my research, I am becoming or pivoting my, I don't want to be just the Buffy scholar for the rest of my life, despite dear listeners wearing a Buffy woodcut print that I wore to my PhD viva, and it was good luck because I passed. But In regards to the scientific revolution or the era of enlightenment, the person in the Western world who discovered the circulation of blood, William Harvey, which was 1627, I believe 1626, give or take, then he's kind of considered the last Aristotelian natural philosopher or the last great scientist. So natural philosophy is what science was called before the word science was created. So natural, that self-explanatory philosopher. So looking at how the world works. So this encompassed physics, biology, chemistry, botany, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason why he was able to kind of conceptualize and discovered that the blood circulated the body in a circuit or a circle rather than kind of entering and then diffusing and being released was because he had an Aristotelian perspective in the way he viewed the world, whereas everyone else was becoming much more rigid in their observation. And I just think that that's a really fun thing to discover and like know is that we had this major scientific Western, it had been discovered in China centuries before.
We have to put that in the footnotes quite often. Like,
Yes, I'm very much a Western historian. I know
we are focusing on European
of
medieval.
global, but yeah. Sorry,
I mean,
you were.
it's even worth acknowledging the fact that the concept of medieval is limited to Europe predominantly. It
Yes.
is generally accepted to be a no-no to say medieval Japan, for example, when talking about the Heian era, that was the medieval Japan. No, they weren't having a medieval period because it's the Middle Ages between our distinct eras. We've had that chat. So it's worth noting that when we talk about the Middle Ages and discoveries, we are very much focusing on like a finite locale as well, that there are influences that come from wider places because of course more travel happened during the medieval era than generally gets represented in like film and TV where it's all universally white and very male. There's a lot more diversity than has been represented. So hopefully we'll chat about that as well in the future of Dames Macabre. But I wanted to ask you if it wouldn't be worth unpacking I can't even say it now. Aristotle, who? Thoughts? What? Like
Yes.
you saying he's the last, but then some of our listeners might be going, the fuck is that?
And apologies, dear listeners. It's just getting into the flow again of not speaking thesis-ese. It takes a bit of time. So Aristotle, one of the three most famous Greek philosophers, right? In like, I don't even remember his years. This is bad. I should have it off the
Big
top.
lists. We're doing
Long,
our
long time ago, around before year zero and after year zero. So Aristotle, so you've got Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, not in that order, but those big guys that pop up throughout. I mean, they show up in like Bill and Ted's Great Adventure and things like that. When I say Aristotelian, that means, coming from the ideas of Aristotle, who was not just a philosopher thinking about the ways of the world, but a natural philosopher. He also thought about, ethics and everything. And so his view of the way the body worked, he actually centralized how the body worked, where the heart, or Aristotle was very fundamental and influential in especially later medieval, so around the years 1200 onwards, because his texts that thought about the body and the world and all of nature, all bodies. So from tadpoles to humans, sheep, cats, etc., is that we all have a soul, a different type of soul. Plants have souls, and then animals have the plant soul and an animal soul, and then humans, we're special. We have three souls. We have the plant, the animal, and then the rational or the human soul. But all of that.
I can't take care of all these souls. I can barely take care of myself. Why do I have like a
I know.
spirit in me? I can't do this. I'm not equipped. Please continue.
It's a lot, yes. But Aristotle believed that all of these souls were rooted or situated in the organ that is the heart for animate creatures. So animals and humans, not plants, because he knew that plants didn't have hearts. So today, when we think of the soul, right, broadly, it's that essence, it's that je ne sais quoi, bit of the fundamental aspect of a being, well, whether that's demonic, human, spiritual, etc. So for those that had the organ that is the heart, it was situated in the heart. And that was really revelatory because of these questions that we still have today, especially with AI coming around, of the mind, the body, and the soul. How are they related? Where are they situated? Is it throughout every single cell now of our body? Is it just in one portion? Does it radiate out? Where does it go afterwards? So when I say Aristotelian, usually I am talking about how that's all tethered together and that his two, in regards to what we now think of biology, his two big ideas were the heart and the blood. Those were key to who you are. And if you read anything in the Bible or like Christian, Protestant, etc., we know that the blood is the life, as Renfield says.
It is pretty damn essential, like both
Yeah.
spiritually, gothically, physically. But as a little bit of foreshadowing, readers, listeners, watchers, whoever you may be out there, I had the absolute delight of hosting a mock viva for Meaghan. So I got to read your thesis, and I thought your exploration of the soul in the heart versus the soul in the blood versus now this I'm gonna tread really carefully so there are no spoilers, but
A free episode, but in the future,
it's exactly
maybe not.
exploring whether vampires can have souls, how those souls might behave for the vampires, and where those souls may be located within the vampires in a medievalized, medievally understood, crypto-medieval universe. So for the people who have seen Buffy, you know what I might be alluding to. The people who haven't seen Buffy, you're going to have like a really good time. So this might actually be a good moment for us to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing with Buffy, do you think? Like what this podcast is going to do specifically to begin now that we've kind of covered the generics.
Yeah, let's do it. So we did just kind of pivot hardcore into Buffy. So the plan of this podcast is you can hear us nerding out about, the nitty-gritty of the metaphysics and the abstract. And because we want to kind of purge ourselves of these ideas and thoughts because they're so vast and exciting, we've decided that to start off this podcast, because it's quite timely and to get going, we are going to do a Buffy rewatch. So we will start from the beginning and go through till the end. But unlike lots of other Buffy rewatch podcasts, such as Buffering the Vampire Slayer or Slayer Fest 97, we'll do 2 episodes per podcast episode, maybe 3, depending on kind of where we're at.
Kind of flexible with it depending on the themes of the episodes. Like if we feel that 2 go really well together, we'll slap them together. If we feel like nothing really relevant or interesting happens in a kind of filler episode, always fun, always a delight, but not necessarily relevant to our angle, we might just pop that in with a couple of others just to kind of keep the flow going. So we're going to be relatively, at this stage, we plan to be relatively flexible. Is that fair to say?
And so on our, fledgling website, which we'll give information for at the end of this episode, and our social medias, etc., we'll kind of have like a little schedule based just on it won't be in the future, or it might be like all kind of to be discussed, but anticipated plans. So, for example, our first official episode, because we're considering this our welcome to the Hellmouth welcome episode, right? But our first official episode will be looking at the first 2 of Buffy in season 1. So, Welcome to the Hellmouth and The Harvest, because they aired together as kind of this, hour and a half long mini movie cliffhanger, enticing welcome to Sunnydale concept, and they're meant to be, even though they're separate episodes, viewed in conjunction with one another. Whereas the next few in season 1 are a bit more monster of the week, independent. There's still the overall story, but
The big bad. But yeah, independent. They tend to be kind of like self-contained. But we wondered, and that's my fault, we wondered a little bit there. You were about to say what makes us unique to the other Buffy podcasts, and then we started talking about structure. Again, sorry, my fault.
that's
Would
fine.
you
And
like to
also,
explain?
just welcome to my brain, dear listeners. And for those of you that know Buffy, the dear listeners is coming from Andrew Wells in season 7, episode 16, Storyteller. Because
We're wondering, again, we're
I'm
wondering.
wondering,
Bring
yes,
it back. Makes us unique. Why are we cool? Why should they listen to us rather than anyone else?
unique and we're cool because we have these backgrounds and this knowledge. And so we're trying to make Buffy like fresh and new and exciting because we can kind of go, hey, that's actually quite factually correct. Or, hey, I don't know if they knew this, when most often you'll probably hear that a lot of, I don't know if the creators knew this, but that's actually really medieval, or that's nonsense. That's gobbledygook, and that is just silly, silly, silly. I just That's not a very good way. Maybe you can be more articulate than me.
The idea is we both have these backgrounds, both in the medieval, but also in maybe horror more for you with a smidgen of Gothic, Gothic more for me with a smidgen of horror. And we just find that we create this really unique Venn diagram of knowledge and expertise and interests that will kind of fill in a behind the scenes understanding of Buffy's theology, Buffy's universe, the magic in Buffy that
Yeah.
I haven't necessarily come across before. Like I've come across people who can do the occult aspects of Buffy, but not always from like a medieval point of view. I don't know. Okay, so dear listeners, I don't know if you are aware of this, but in Gothic studies, until I came along, there was this assumption that Gothic had absolutely nothing to do with the medieval era. So the very first Gothic novel, as we understand Gothic, was The Castle of Otranto. And the author set it during the Middle Ages because he claimed it was true, and he thought people would be more likely to believe it was true if it happened in that horrible era.
That
And
distant past.
exactly where superstition existed, where people were more credulous and less likely to look for an enlightened explanation for these supernatural events or what have you. Anyway, it kind of created this idea that anything medieval in the Gothic is sham, is just atmosphere, is just set dressing, is just a prop. And that has continued throughout Gothic studies and throughout horror studies until us, basically. It was kind of inevitable that we were going to find each other one way or another because academia isn't that big and our research is so precise. But this is what we're going to bring to Buffy. It's not just going to be, well, of course they use crosses on vampires. That's what you use on a vampire. We are going to be able to tell you about how Bram Stoker introduced Catholicism. Oh, there's a cat. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, everybody, my cat Bowie has just entered into the recording frame and is demanding attention.
But yes, so we'll be able to discuss how a Catholic iconography entered the vampire myth, what Buffy is doing with that, what Buffy is subverting about that, and how that has medieval precedent. So we'll be able to give you this kind of academic lineage, yes, but we are both massive nerds about Buffy, so we will still keep it exciting and entertaining and fun because we
Yes.
will just like we presented at a conference together once and we were on the same panel because I was presenting a paper on Dracula as Unholy Grail quest and you were exploring a chapter you were developing on blood and the soul, and I think
It was the beginning days of me realizing that I had to deal with Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas.
I remember the fear in your eyes.
Yes.
This fabulous moment. So, for people who aren't in academia, what happens is you go to a conference, you have an extract of your research that you present to a room full of your academic peers, and then at the end, they give you thoughts, opinions disguised as questions, and sometimes actual questions. And the idea is you kind of like ricochet some extra ideas off that moment and develop your research whilst also networking, letting people know what you're working on if they want to work on similar topics with you. So we were at this conference and we were both in the same panel because we were both doing vampires. And there was this moment where we were stood in front of this screen of, I think it was the medieval image of the heart with the stake through it.
Yes.
And someone asked a question about whether or not a vampire is a revenant or someone coming back from the dead means something else. And you started talking. And I went, oh, you mean because we see this happen in the Buffy episode? And you were like, yeah, absolutely. It's because that happens and that changes all of this. And I was like, well, that's fantastic. And we just ended up like we had to stop ourselves because we just completely monopolized
Yeah.
that panel for a good 5 minutes so we could just aggressively nerd out at each other. So you've got that to look forward to. We've got edit buttons, listeners and watchers. We can get rid of the worst of it, but that poor audience had no choice but to sit through it.
Unfiltered. And with that, yes, there's going to be a major emphasis on the medieval in this, but not only are we medieval and Buffy nerds, but we're just nerds as a whole. So there will be lots of pop culture references and connections to, if not our research, the general scope of our research to contemporary occurrences. So, the film Nosferatu, the film Sinners has just released. I'm seeing it on Thursday. I haven't seen it yet. I'm seeing it on Thursday.
I'm so excited to hear your thoughts.
And of course, we've kind of mentioned like the Pope and things and trying to make it all relevant. So it's not just how the medieval and Buffy had this relationship, which for me, like Alex, I am the kind of, from the best of my knowledge, the first to make these connections. And it's funny because when I've talked to other medievalists, either at a conference or around campus or, via email or something, they're always like, oh, I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But
Okay.
one of them has ever actually engaged with the medieval in Buffy, which is overwhelming. It's in it. I struggled so much in scope of my thesis because there's still so much more I have to say. I just had to choose blood as my theme for the thesis. But there is so much more, yeah, in the magic, in the way the world is, but also just weird. You can use that medieval concept of the weird, so W-Y, and weird fiction, so H.P. Lovecraft
Yes.
can be tied into Buffy and read through that lens. And, I didn't do that in my thesis, but you can absolutely do that.
I've managed in my thesis to pull in a little nod towards weird fiction at the end and the medieval inheritance within weird fiction because you can trace it like directly through like my technique. You've got H.P. Lovecraft, who was American,
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily like it's a little bit more tricky for the American writers, I feel, because the British writers, we have medieval ruins just knocking about that you just go past the castle and go, well, yeah, that's the castle. Who cares? And we carry on with our lives. So there isn't that kind of conceptualization of medieval as presence in American writing at this point. But H.P. Lovecraft absolutely adored Arthur Machen. Arthur Machen was a Gothic weird fiction author. You might have read The Great God Pan. He's done some amazing short stories. And Arthur Machen was a dilettante medievalist. He was obsessed with the Holy Grail as a religious expression for him. So he was reading medieval texts to create these Gothic texts, which then H.P. Lovecraft was reading and borrowing this kind of Gothic medieval universe of this concept of God being huge and unfathomable, but also mingling with the idea that the universe is a cold and uncaring place. And by kind of like splicing those together, H.P. Lovecraft came up with this real, visceral, weird, cosmic horror of the universe is vast and uncaring, but also malicious, and we are but bugs. And so you can kind of trace the medieval even in that aspect of weird fiction.
Yeah.
So
And we'll definitely bring in a lot more H.P. Lovecraft in our first episode because of the cosmology or the world, the mythology, the universe, however you want to say it, of Buffy that's created. There are deliberate references to H.P. Lovecraft, such as the old ones in the first two episodes of Buffy, that are very crunchy and informative. And, you can then choose the fork in the road. I chose one, there's another to go. So, weird literature and Gothic literature nerds and everyone, we see you and we hear you, and we're
we
gonna
are
bring it.
you.
Yeah, and we are you. So we're gonna bring it all in.
Yes.
It's very exciting. But we don't want to ramble on too long in your ears. But one thing we did kind of do to show a little bit of our personalities and a bit more of how we think and engage with research is I kind of came up with, I guess, prompt or activity for us is so each episode of the podcast, we will come with a quote. So it can be from Buffy or from something in our research or something that we just feel is related or just stood out, like a favorite line. Maybe there's a favorite line, just to kind of be a discussion point. And it'll just also be fun to see what we're extracting and thinking of each cycle. So for this, because we haven't watched anything as of yet, I asked for both of us to come up with a quote that just kind of either encapsulates our research or our personality or our academic trajectory. Or I will let Alex go first because then naturally I came up with this prompt and struggled with it myself. So I actually have two because my brain I couldn't choose. So Alex, I will let you go first. What is your little quote or thing that you brought for
Well,
us?
I brought Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, and
Mhm.
rather than inflict potential spoilers by doing some of my like really real favorite quotes, I'm going to go with the iconic opening paragraph. I went a little bit sideways with the prompt. It was too hard because my research is so sprawling. It covers over 100 years of Gothic literature, over 1,000 years when you include the medieval era of literature and culture. And just trying to distill that into one quote was kind of impossible for me.
It's an absurd prompt that I gave. in hindsight. Like, and there's no wrong sideways way. It was so abstract that
This is true. So I decided to try and trace back, okay, where was the moment where I got into what I got into? Like, what moment in my life can I point to and say, there, that is when I got into Gothic, that is when I started thinking about things. And it was, I'll read the quote out in a minute, I'll just explain like the contexty type stuff. So, my mum is obsessed with horror, and she raised me to be as obsessed with horror. And one of the things she introduced me to was the 1963 film of The Haunting. So that's the black and white film. And it's absolutely magnificent as a horror. Like,
so there's such tension in it.
yes,
It's that, and it's also because it's black and white. There
yeah,
is just that you're not distracted by the saturation of color
mm,
of someone's costuming and thinking, well, why are they in yellow if they're depressed? It's all,
yes. And then they do that wonderful mid-century thing where they have to play with shadows.
yes.
I mean, I think like I'm also a little bit of a film nerd, so I'm sorry. But I think Casablanca does it really beautifully where they will project shadows into backgrounds to create these wonderful things. So The
Or
Haunting,
to the famous claws up the stairs, for those of you that maybe haven't seen Casablanca.
but there is this wonderful moment in the film that uses anaglypta wallpaper. So anaglypta wallpaper is the stuff that has like flocking that sticks out. So it's tactile. If ever you were a terrible child, you could stick your thumb into the bit that stuck forwards and kind of peel a little bit off. They did this wonderful scene with that where they created shadows in the wallpaper that a character could look at and see a face, and she was just kind of unraveling about it. But I do not remember a moment in my life when I did not watch The Haunting. It has been one of like my like I can't remember an identity pre The Haunting. Like it was just, and I remember talking to my mum about it, and I would have been about 7, and we were just chatting about how great the film was generally because I loved spooky things and Halloween anyway. And my mum said, what I really love about it is that you can't tell if the ghosts are real or if Eleanor is just going mad. And I viscerally remember the feeling of my brain cracking open with my first bit of essentially literary analysis of the story that you're being told isn't necessarily the only story you can get from what's happening. And I think that was the first moment I understood metaphor as well. So I
Mm.
think that was kind of like the crystallizing moment for me of Gothic is something that can talk about what can't be talked about. And I
Yeah.
thought that was just magnificent. And I think Shirley Jackson is amazing for doing that.
Oh,
And
she's
it's
a
also
mess.
really nice to read this out because this was the copy I studied from as an undergrad. You can see my sad little notes in the margins. I'm just camera listeners. But then it also was the copy that I taught from when I taught at the University of Liverpool for a few years. It just all comes so full circle. Okay, so this is the opening paragraph of The Haunting of Hill House. And many of you listeners, if you're into horror, you'll know it because it is. So, no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years, and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Like literally, goosebumps, goosebumps. Just
It,
read. She's brilliant with semicolons. The semicolon use is absolutely fantastic. You've got the fact that the hills are its hills belonging to Hill House, how it holds darkness within. It's claustrophobic, but also expansive. Also, it's always deeply entertaining as a European to hear a Gothic horror being set in a house that's only 80 years old. It's like, oh,
it's quite funny because you're the British person and you're saying, that the Americans, our concept of Gothic is very different. And that's where we have American Gothic and we have Southern Gothic. But then Shirley Jackson is the maestro
yes.
of, or one of the maestros of just Gothic, full stop. It's also funny because then my two examples are one is British and then the other one is an American but living in Britain. So it's kind of like we've crossed over
Ah,
paths.
we just kind of like slingshot, like,
Yeah. And it's so good. And for those of you that haven't read The Haunting of Hill House, I mean, it's not that long. You can't put it down as a read. But if you're just not inclined to reading and are more of a visual person, the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House I personally love, if you're into, if you want to like binge watch, and then of course you have The Haunting from 1963. I would say you can skip the remake in the 90s unless you really want to enjoy some cringe, goofy, but also at times good horror.
And you have to abandon the fact that it's based on a Shirley Jackson. Like
Yeah.
a few of the concepts are there and everything else is gone. So it's fun. I enjoyed it. I was deeply offended by it when I went to see it at the cinema when I was a kid because I was like, no, no, why? This one already exists. Why make this?
Yeah.
Now, this, I mean, it might be worth us doing like a rewatch of like the
Netflix.
Netflix shows and whatnot because I do love the Netflix show. I really enjoy it. I think it is incredibly clever and interesting. I don't think it can really claim to be an adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House. I think it's too loosely inspired by to be an adaptation. And I won't do spoilers. But the last episode, the last 10 minutes of the last episode, angers me. And I
Yeah.
would love to talk about that in
It
depth.
was a perfect show until you get to the last 10 minutes, and then you're kind of like,
Mm.
what is
I
a
ruin everything.
masterclass of horror, I would say. That, and then, I mean, we could also do Midnight Mass, which has been demanding a rewatch by
Yeah.
me.
I mean,
And
it's going to be really interesting us doing this because although we say that we are very alike and we have these similar interests and we both love Buffy, we also both have incredibly different takes on the more modern stuff. It's like you love Midnight Mass, especially you love
uh,
like the soliloquies. Whereas
fucking love a good soliloquy.
I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah.
It slows down everything. There's showing. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, and then we can also do, I really liked The Fall, The House of Usher, which is an Edgar Allan Poe love note. Done it very, some of it is brilliant and some of it is, I hate it. But I think that tracing the Mike Flanagan universe, uh, we can skip Midnight Club, in my opinion.
It's really interesting because I loved Christopher Pike when I was a teenager. I, the massive nerd, it will shock no one to know, was bullied at school and so spent all my time hiding in the library reading Christopher Pike novels. Again, I am who I am for many reasons. And so I read the Midnight Club books then. And so watching the show, I was like, I don't
Yeah.
vaguely remember this story.
Well, and then this is also kind of getting into the differences of us because, so one of my best friends, Heather, shout out to you, Heather.
Hi, Heather.
You would get along with Heather phenomenally. She grew up with all of the midnight clubs and everything, has always loved horror, whereas I am a bit more of a latecomer. So I will pivot into my quotes, if that's
Yes,
okay. Kind of,
please.
yeah, I was a bit of a scaredy cat as a child, and I think like the scariest thing I would watch was Wizard of Oz, The Wicked Witch of the West, or I mean, I watched like Rambo's First Blood when I was 6 or 7, with my dad, but I had this sincere fear of being possessed by the devil because when I was 5, no, wait, maybe 4, it was Christmas and my dad was flipping through the TV channels and it was the infamous pea soup scene from The Exorcist. And he went, "This is a famous scene. We need to watch it." And I just remember being like, "Change it, change it." And like my hands were over my face. And it's definitely a core moment, but kind of traumatizing. I had also, on some coffee table book at my grandparents' house, where you'd flip it, there was a section on like possession for some reason. And, I was learning to read, and I just remember if it was in that or elsewhere, but the idea that if you show fear, it makes you more susceptible to being possessed. And so I kid you not, until I was in like fucking high school, I couldn't deal with possession stories, exorcisms, anything. Also, my grandfather, my mom's dad, was an Episcopal priest. He has since deceased, but so I grew up with all of that. So I'm not saying that I'm like religious, but religion was a part of my upbringing. So I think that the reality of that was very tangible to me in a way, even though Episcopalianism is different than Catholicism, but it's also just Diet Coke Catholicism. We can get into that in the future.
And we will.
So yeah, I was very much like a wimp, and I also just wasn't that big of a reader. I was very much more an outdoor kid and being sports and just kind of laying in the grass telling stories to myself. So yeah, my becoming and getting into horror, I remember watching The Haunting in Connecticut when I was about 13, and I watched it during the day, sunlight out, midday, and it scared the fucking shit out of me. And I remember I was visiting my mom when she was living in Casper, Wyoming, in a house from like 1912 or so. So, you know, old in American standards, but almost brand new here in the UK. But she was like, "Oh, well, you know, our house is haunted, right?" And I was like, "This isn't a funny joke, mother."
Yeah.
But no, the previous owner, he like had a heart attack and died in his car in the driveway. You know, he's still here. And I was like, this isn't fun. And my mom's house was, you know, split levels. So like downstairs in the basement was her bedroom, the TV room, the office, and then a bathroom. And then upstairs was like where I slept and the main kitchen, etc. And this was when my growing up childhood dog, Corgi Polo, was still alive and I was his person. So he was like a shadow and always with me. So this is like later that night after my mom had told me that, you know, she would sometimes see shadows and that Polo would like watch them on the wall. So I'm staying up until like 2 a.m. because I can't sleep. But a week prior to my visiting my mom, there had been a major rainstorm. So there were holes in the ceilings in the basement from the flooding. And I remember, you know, 2 a.m. or so, I'm sitting, I'm 13, I'm watching Hannah Montana on Disney Channel because what else are you going to do when you can't fall asleep and you just need fluff? Polo's laying on the floor and I hear this soft thud. And I look over and it's like a wolf spider or a hobo spider. I fuck you not. I felt like it was the size of my hand, but it was probably like a silver dollar or golf ball size, you know, with the legs and everything. Just walking towards my dog. And so I scooped him up and like was crying, running into my mom's room for her to kill it. And she went out, couldn't find it. So I was like, great, 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 great. But in the haunting in Connecticut, bugs are kind of like a signifier that something's occurring in the house. So needless to say, I didn't sleep for about 2 weeks because Polo, you know, laying in my room and he would just growl out of nowhere. And it's more because my room overlooked the front and the sidewalk. So it was probably people on that. Not
Yes.
the ghost in my house, but I'm like, it's the ghost, and he's growling because they're coming for me. Also, little side note, found the spider in the shower 3 days later. Um,
Ugh.
sprinted upstairs butt naked, crying once again to my mom. And I remember she flushed it, and it turned into this like, ugh. I Dear listeners slash viewers, I no longer I try to catch them and put them back outside unless it frightens the living daylights out of me and then it doesn't stand a chance because of fear.
If they were bigger than you, they'd eat you, and they're not paying rent.
Yeah, like Aragog in Chamber of Secrets still scares me.
Uh, did you
Yeah,
ever watch like Arachnophobia when you were a kid? It was the one
no,
that
but
gave
I
me.
think because of yeah, but I think as an adult I could definitely handle it and enjoy it, you know, and think it's goofy and fun. But so
Yes,
I'm
the
not a
quotes.
horror person. So my quotes are much later, and so they're not so much about life inspiration, but more ones that have stuck with me and then kind of reflecting back. They either made it into my thesis or were very formative in my thesis. So I will start with my Sylvia Plath quote, I think. It's from Ariel,
Great.
classic. And so this is when, I mean, I read Ariel actually probably not until I was about 20 or so, and then revisiting it during the pandemic when I was panic thinking about PhD ideas. So it's from the poem Elm, which is one of my favorites by Sylvia Plath. And so it's the fourth to last stanza. So I am terrified by this dark thing that sleeps in me. All day I feel its soft, feathery turnings, its malignity. So letting that sit, and then I'm going to read my other quote and then kind of bring them together. So this other quote is from the television series Penny Dreadful, and it's the very last set of lines from the last episode, the finale of the first season. So the episode Guignol, so season 1, episode 8. And the character Vanessa Ives, played by Eva Green, throughout the season has been having crises of self and potential possession scenarios. Alex has never seen Penny Dreadful, so that's something that will be forthcoming eventually. But in this scene, Vanessa has she's desperate and so she's gone to a priest and she's talking to a priest and she's asking for the rite of exorcism. Penny Dreadful takes place in like 1892, 1895 time, give or take. So late Victorian. So the priest is like, well, an exorcism, you know, it's not just one and done. It's a series of the rite. It can take days, months, years. It can never happen. You know, this is it's almost a trial. It's a trial of faith and it's a trial on your body. And so these are the last series of lines of the season. And it kind of encapsulates, I think, a lot of my research and my just interest in horror and the intersections with the medieval as well. So this is all the priest talking. If you've been touched by the demon, it's like being touched by the backhand of God. Makes you sacred in a way, doesn't it? Makes you unique with a kind of glory. The glory of suffering, even. Now, here's my question. Do you really want to be normal? So, those are my two quotes. They're kind of longer, but I think together we both have the same like length of words for the quote. And so to me, this idea of, well, what does it mean to be touched by the backhand of God? You're still touched by God, but of course the backhand, is meant to be, it's just like the left hand, right? Where it's the bad hand, it's the hand of Lucifer. Even in like Middle Eastern culture, it's the hand that you use to clean yourself and wipe yourself. You don't eat with it. Being left-handed is bad.
And it comes from the word sinister.
Yeah. So, and this idea of, but you can still be sacred. And what does the word sacred mean? And unique. And then this idea of the glory of suffering, which I won't focus on that now because everybody get ready. That is one of my juicy bits I love. And being normal and like, what does it mean to be normal? And do you want to be normal? We always think, oh, you want to be extraordinary. You want to be exceptional. You want to stand out. And especially for Buffy, that is something that she struggles with from the very first episode. So I think that's kind of a good way to, end thinking about that. But the Sylvia Plath, just briefly, for those of you who don't know, tragic life and everything, but Elm, which is dedicated to Ruth Fainlight, I should have said at the beginning. But the part, that I'm terrified by this dark thing that sleeps in me. All day I feel its soft, feathery turnings, its malignity. It can be, there's lots of interpretation, but it could be about her depression, her suicidal tendencies, her struggles with her identity and her life with her husband slash fellow poet Ted Hughes. There's a lot there, but also it's a dark thing and it sleeps within, kind of like the backhand of God and being touched, but it's soft, it's got feathery turnings, it's alive. But then that last line, it's malignity, just like the glory of suffering. I think that they work together in a pair. And so yeah, I guess my final thoughts are, what is being sacred? What is the glory of suffering? And I think that our discussions with Buffy will unpack those. There's not a right or wrong answer. There's loads of interpretations, but I think it's a good introduction into hopefully what will be a very exciting and dynamic conversation, not just for us selfishly,
Yes.
but for you all watching and viewing.
Hopefully. I found it really interesting listening to your quotes and the introduction to the Penny Dreadful one and about how exorcism is a process that has to be done over time and can take forever and might never happen anyway. And I was going to make a little quip, but decided not to because you were explaining it so beautifully. I just wanted to listen. But I was going to joke, sounds like therapy. It's not something that happens all at once. It's a process that goes on forever and might never happen. And so I was thinking about how tagging it in with my quote, I suppose, is how the Gothic can often be a metaphor for mental health, for depression, how possession can be something like mental illness. And this isn't me demonizing mental illness, by the way. This is just me offering these as metaphoric ways of expressing these things. And then pairing it with Sylvia Plath and obviously hair issues. And then the question of, do you want to be normal? I was a little bit about that because I was almost worried like it's the suffering artist trope almost. You want to be normal when you can feel everything too much and therefore be creative, and that trap that can kind of happen, that kind of self-mythology of I have to be in pain or I can't create.
Right. Well, and then also the other side of that coin, or its partner of the fine line between madness and genius. And of course, maybe that doesn't apply as much to Buffy, but those are still questions that are within the Gothic, within the medieval, and just today. So I think that there's a lot for us to unpack there.
Very much so.
But in kind of wrapping up, hopefully you've stuck with us throughout this kind of wandering conversation, diatribe, excitement. We will be sharing we will be, releasing on social media and most likely all podcast platforms. But you can also find us on social media and our developing website at the moment. So you can find us under the name Dames Macabre. So DAMES, space or no space, it'll show up either way. MACABRE. And that's our email. You'll find our website that way. And then Alex has a wonderful Instagram, which is
My Instagram is Decadence and Dark Ages. Yes, I do have the terrible phrase Dark Ages in my name, but that is very deliberate. And I share all kinds of goodies and reviews and art. I do a lot of art and art history as well on that. And I also have a website which is literatureunlocked. And through that, I'm kind of in the process. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher right now, but I'm what is called a precarious academic, which is where I haven't landed a university job right now. I mean, this podcast might end up being quite useful for people doing PhDs and wanting to know what the landscape outside of the PhD is like. Sorry to say it's not great. So I have gone freelance as an academic, and I'm trying to find ways of making academia accessible to people outside of the university environment. So I run creative writing workshops. I do book clubs that are run like university seminars where we do literary analysis of texts, not just, reading a text a little bit more passively and then saying whether or not you enjoyed it. I will kind of help you dig into the why? What makes it good? What makes it bad? What can we say about both the world in which this book was written and the world we're living in right now? I'm also hoping to do some performance lectures with actor friends at some point. But this is all quite new. It's all in development and it all can be found, I'll say it again, literatureunlocked.org. Thank you very much.
yes. And you'll be able to also find the links in our show notes, our YouTube notes, whatever there are, wherever there are notes, also on our website. And I can also attest that Alex is a wonderful Mock Viva host, Mock Viva-ist.
Yeah, I went with host. It felt like the best way of kind of, because I'm not we didn't. So again, for people outside of academia, a Viva is the spoken exam you have to sit with two experts in the field to prove that you have written your thesis, you understand your thesis, and you've got ideas outside your thesis. It's harrowing. It is hours of pure pain, and it fills all of us with terror beforehand. So I also offer mock Vivas where I will read theses and then give you light-hearted workshop to prepare you for your.
Yes, Alex was phenomenal and helped me so much in preparing for it. The Viva is also known, if not just the exam, but a defense. You're defending your thesis, you're defending your ideas, and everything else. And then I am just entering into that void or abyss of the post-thesis, post-PhD world, but I am currently hoping to be teaching some courses as a TA or teaching assistant at the University of Manchester in medieval literature and the history of medicine because I am pivoting more into history of medicine, pursuing projects on blood. So more on that will be forthcoming. And then you can find my social media Instagram at Meaghan, Meaghan, Allen, or A. I should know that, but Allen is ALL. Type in the first bits and I'll show up. It's a black and white photo of me. Alex will be teaching me how to market myself on Instagram. But if you type anything in with the Meaghan Allen, I should come up. My researcher page, my Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that jazz. And again, the social links will be in our show notes. But
Right, we're hoping to have more social media dedicated to Dames Macabre specifically. But as this is, again, early days, we figure having the website, the podcast, and hopefully a YouTube. So for listeners, you will be getting a slightly sleeker experience that's more podcast oriented. We hope editing to be confirmed, and viewers we're hoping to kind of, so I've been recording this as a Zoom meeting and we're going to be putting this up on YouTube, probably with slightly more chaos. So we will be getting a little bit more streamlined towards being Dames Macabre focused, but right now, because we're both doing 1,000 things at once, and this is one of the plates that we're spinning, we're still in the early days. So thank you for your patience while we figure out how this works.
yes, but I think that's it. So until next time, I'm Meaghan.
I'm Alec.
And this is Dames Macabre. Woo!